Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast, where we comically and literally review comics. I'm Ryan, also known as Comic Stan. I love comic books, but my co-host loves regular books, so I make him read comic books. And this week, I made him read, close enough, I'm leaving that in, it's fine, making him read some of the best Superman stories ever, apparently. And with me, as always, my aforementioned futuristic co-host, it's Jamie.
Hello, it's podcast time.
And now is the reveal for the keen-eared listeners that we are doing remote again for the reverse reasons that we did it last time.
I just really couldn't leave the house today.
That you're the ill one this time?
Yeah, I don't feel great. And to be honest with you, as much as like it was a altruistic act of like saving you from catching whatever it is I think I've got, it was mostly that me feeling a little bit ill has made me really not feel emotionally ready to leave my little cocoon. And so I wanted to podcast from my cocoon with all of my blankets and my cat. And so that's what I'm doing. It's good. I like it.
It's especially funny when you try and this is for everyone, when you try and do something under the guise of altruism, like, oh, I don't want to bother you. And then me being like, no, it's fine. You can still come around. And you'd be like, oh, I actually have to reveal my secret selfish reasons.
Yeah, really. I just don't want to leave the fucking house. And I didn't leave the house, and my day is better for it. I have a pot. I literally, because I didn't have to leave the house to podcast, I've been able to make a pot of restorative stew, which is currently in my oven getting sexy as we speak. And so when we're done, instead of having to get in my car and turn the ignition and put the roof down, because that's a necessity, and drive home, I can just go to my kitchen and there is stew.
Well, speaking of restorative effects, one could describe you afterwards as feeling feeling super afterwards.
One would describe that, and I think it's time that we buckle ourselves in, we strap in, and we get ready for a very exciting pan down to what is going to be a more better Superman episode than we've ever done, because guess who wrote this one, guys?
Well, you say than we've ever done, but we've done one by the same writer.
But this one's going to be more better.
It's definitely going to be more-ish.
There's going to be more of it.
Well, we'll see how long we go. But we are covering two Superman stories this week, and the first
one of them's by Alan Moore.
It's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, written by aforementioned Alan Moore, with art by Curt Swan and George Pérez. And this one, I think, was a kind of a compromise of us where I was like, we should probably do more Superman because the Superman film's coming out. And I knew what would get you on board immediately was, and it's written by Alan Moore.
Well, no, this came out of a very different conversation. Do you remember? Because I was talking about the DC Strange Love series on TikTok and said that we should do some anthologies. And you said there's an anthology series that has Superman and Alan Moore, and that fits in much better than whatever bollocks you were going to suggest we do, and so is what we're doing.
Yeah, I had suggested a different anthology series, and then I said, or we could do the Superman stuff, which isn't technically anthology.
And I got, oh, okay, so this isn't anthology series stuff.
I mean, they're self-contained stories in themselves, which an anthology is made up of, but these aren't really... And to be fair, the other one is just an issue of a running series. This is somewhat of a self-contained story, even though it actually did take place across two Superman series that were running at the time. So it actually took place across Action Comics number 583 and Superman 423, which were both published in June of 1986. So that's... It was like a special kind of hey, let's put the story in across series so people buy both series, little bit of capitalistic endeavor for you.
So A Killing Joke came out in 1987, right?
I see. You asked me questions I'm going to need to double check.
I thought it was 87. My memory seems to want me to think it's 87.
It's 88, so you were very close.
I was close. So this is pre-Killing... This is Alan Moore germinating the idea that would become A Killing Joke, right?
Yes, but I'm also looking up when Watchmen was out, because that's also...
This is post-Watchmen. That was 82.
Came out in 86 and 87, so the same year, in fact.
Okay.
And And to be fair, he was working on that for about a year beforehand. So he's got a year of prep while he's doing this.
Alan Moore would have written this around the same time he was writing Watchmen.
I think so, yeah.
So if we start with the arting then.
Well, one little bit I thought is interesting, and I think you'll agree before we get into the big stuff. What's interesting about this series is the reason it's kind of as it is because basically they were trying to find someone to end the Silver Age, Bronze Age Superman character. Because at this time, they were doing Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was resetting the entire DC universe at this time. So the Superman that was going to come after Crisis was a new Superman starting from scratch.
Yeah. Okay.
So this was kind of like a swan song to the Superman they'd had for the previous, like, several decades.
Oh, so this was like a goodbye to not the new Superman. Somebody else did, like, the reboot or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So they were already planning to do something big for saying goodbye to this version of Superman. So apparently, and there was a little forward in the kind of collected edition of this. I'm guessing you did not read it?
No.
So I only skimmed it, but there was a part that I thought you would enjoy. So the guy who was trying, it was like the DC editor at the time, was trying to like get the people together for this series. And he said, when we thought of getting someone to write the last of this Superman issues, we thought there's only one person who's up to the task of delivering on this kind of task. That's right, it's Jerry Siegel, the co-creator of Superman. They wanted to get the guy who created it, who literally created it and wrote the first issues in 1938, to then finish them in like 50 years later in 1986.
Right.
And then Jerry Siegel...
That didn't happen.
So Jerry Siegel was up for it, but unfortunately, due to other commitments, could not do it. Like, he was planned to do it at one point, and then unfortunately had to pull out.
How old was he at this point?
Let's have a look.
He can't have been a young man at this point, Ryan. He must have been getting up there. For him to have done anything notable 50 years before.
Yeah, so he was born in 1914. So 86 would have had him at 72 years of age.
He was in his 70s. What other commitments did it? A shuffleboard game? What the fuck was he up to so that he couldn't write Superman? Imagine being in your 70s and somebody asking you to write Superman and you're like, no, I'm really sorry, I'm just too busy. Slow down, man.
I mean, to be fair, he did pass away about 10 years later, so maybe he was going too fast.
Yeah, maybe he was just enjoying the end of his life, and I've just shouted at a dead man for no reason. It really reminds me of that John Romita episode.
Yeah, well, that's comic book discourse in a nutshell.
Isn't it just? So they wanted the original creator of Superman, couldn't get him because he was busy playing shuffleboard, and so their next option was Alan Moore, basically.
So what happened was, and this is a classic Alan Moore, the guy who was arranging all this said, the next morning, still wondering what to do about it, I happened to be having breakfast with Alan Moore. So I told him about my difficulties. At that point, he literally rose out of his chair, put his hands around my neck, and said, if you let anybody but me write that story, I'll kill you.
Well, that's very... I was about to say... That story doesn't sound very Alan Moore. Alan Moore wouldn't go and have breakfast with somebody, but he would strangle his friend over breakfast. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And I just thought, I was skimming over and I was like, wait, what was that? And then, oh, that's perfect.
That's so more. It's more than we could hope for.
I mean, I'm always up for more. You know me.
More. It's become a bit of a joke on the podcast, like how much we talk about Alan Moore. What I think is really interesting is through the literal years that we've been doing this now, our perspective on Alan Moore has both become more nuanced and more memeified than it was at the start.
Yeah, he's a multifaceted fellow. Probably might be the most multifaceted fellow in the world, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, he is more than just a wizard. He is... Imagine, like, you and I having breakfast, Ryan, right? And you're talking about, like, a creative project that you're heading up. And I stand up and I put my hands around your neck and scream, if you let anybody else do it, we wouldn't be friends anymore.
No, but if you also was at the time writing and releasing Watchmen, and probably very successful before that as well, you'd be like, yeah, it's like those like rock stars who trash a hotel room. It's like, yeah, but you know, they bring the money in, so we gotta do it.
Man, does he play those 3 chords?
Man, does he strap himself in with those cigarettes and write crazy comic book scripts.
Yeah, fair. I mean, fair. Like, and they let him do it. And so, broad thoughts.
I'm very interested in what your take is.
It's pretty cool.
I really enjoyed it as well. I thought it was
It's pretty
really
cool, man. Yeah, it's entertaining.
I felt like it was an updated, and by updated I mean for the 80s, an updated version of the 60s and 70s comic book style of the Silver Age and Bronze Age.
It doesn't quite have Alan Moore's hard edge that he had in Watchmen, but he was writing for DC and he was writing Superman, so he knew he couldn't take it that far. But it's still fucking cool, isn't it?
I don't think it's that it lacks his edge. I think really this is just the other side of his relationship with superhero characters. I think this is more of an expression of his love for the medium and the characters. And that is the driving force behind him doing things that broke the mold and challenged the conventions. It's only someone who's obsessed with the source material can so expertly dissect it and examine it. You know what I mean?
I do, yeah. I think you're right. I think you make a very valid point.
Yeah. I don't think he's ever expressed like hate for Superman or whatever. I think it's just how he's perceived and maybe how he's been mishandled by later creators and stuff. I think he does like the core character. And I think that's evident in this because this is a love letter to Superman, like some other stuff we've read about Superman. But it also does interesting stuff with him. I noticed a lot of similarities to one of the only other Superman texts we've done on this podcast, which is All-Star Superman.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
I will get into that more into the story. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it and I'm excited to talk about it.
To build on the point you were making, I think you're so right. Like the rhetoric that Alan Moore uses about superheroes and comic books in the industry has never really struck me as somebody who truly doesn't like it. He sounds like a lover scorned, doesn't he?
Yeah.
When he talks about the comic book industry.
It's like he's sad that it's not as good as it could be in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly that. So, the artwork.
The artwork's a really interesting one. I didn't make many notes about it, even though I did generally quite enjoy it. I think my main takeaway, and it's a positive one, is that it felt like I said, an updated version of the 60s, 70s style with like crisper lines and kind of a bit more detail and just generally like an updated, better looking. But it felt like the 60s, 70s version in HD. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. It was my favorite thing about it.
Very vibrant colors, very interesting, very eye-catching the entire time.
Yeah, I think it was the thing that struck me about it straight off the bat is that it looked old, and it is nearly 50 years old now. Well, it's nearly 40 years old, isn't it? But
yeah, 40 is this one.
It's nearly 40 years old. But it looks really good. I mean, again, it's sort of it's one of those things that I think reading some of these older comics has really made me rethink my perspective on comic book art, because I used to see it as sort of a trajectory where things were just getting better and crisper and cleaner because of digital art. But there are so many instances that we've come across in these older comic books where things just looked fucking great. And this is one of them where it looked great, it was crisp, it was clean, it had a vibrancy that I think is sometimes lacking from modern comic books. The art wasn't pulling its weight in telling the story the way that some modern art does, and I think that is a way in which the art form has sort of moved forward in the past 40 years. But for the most part, it looked great and it's what kept me turning pages with this one. It's what kept me going through it. And you know, sometimes that's story, sometimes that's art, but for this comic, I think the art really shone through, and it was there was so many moments where I was looking at these panels thinking, fuck, that is a piece of artwork that I would hang on a wall. It had that effect on me. There was so many moments where there was pieces of art that I would gladly hang on a wall.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's interesting to look at this art and think, because again, I really enjoyed it as well. It's an interesting thing, like, oh, this is like the best version of this style, but it's also kind of a not a true representation of the style. So it's kind of hard to compare it to the art of the 60s, 70s, when I think this benefits from, you know, kind of the extra techniques and technology and stuff they had in the 80s as opposed to the previous decades.
in some regards, it's almost a homage to the art of the 60s and 70s, isn't it?
Yes, that's a better way of explaining it, yeah. And to be fair, it's all a homage to that time because it's saying goodbye to one of the biggest characters of that time, of the superhero genre.
Yeah. So, just out of interest, and again, I know this isn't kind of what the listeners are here for, so forgive me this indulgence, but what changed at this point with Superman? Sort of, is this the point where he became grittier? Is this the point where things got a bit darker? Like, what were the actual changes that they enacted, or is this just the point at which they say we're capping off this first kind of run of Superman almost that's lasted 50 years, and we're now going to do something different?
So it wasn't unique to Superman. So it wasn't a specific character or characterization kind of thing. What it was a problem of canon and over expanded lore. So
is this Crisis on Infinite Earths?
Yes. Crisis
Right,
of Infinite
yeah.
Earth was running around this time for the explicit purpose of tying up and organizing and just simplifying this universe that had been on constant expansion since the 40s, basically. I know that Superman started in 38, but like the larger DC universe was kind of maybe close to the 40s, maybe even 50s, if I'm incorrect. But
and how long at this point? How long do we know? Do you know how long DC had been running as an interconnected universe? Because right at the start, because we looked at action and Detective Comics like 1, didn't we? And things decidedly weren't running as a sort of contiguous universe then. But there has to be a point where people started crossing over and events started happening over multiple titles, right?
I don't think there's a hard and fast point to say when it did or didn't happen, because what you had was it's not like they had 50 characters and then they were like, oh, we should start crossing them over. It's like you almost certainly had Batman crossing over on Superman and Superman crossing over with Batman, but these were initially they were done as just like a sales point for the comic. So what would happen is if one character's sales were low that month, you'd have him cross over onto the more popular one. And then he'd be like, hey, I'm Batman, or hey, I'm Superman. And then they go back, and the hope, and I guess it must have been successful, was people went, oh, I like that character, I'm going to check out their series. So
that makes sense,
that happening slowly but steadily, and then over the time as well, and over the decades, DC acquiring more characters and creating more characters as well. So as they slowly would build more and more characters, they would cross over more, and then you would have team-built series, like the Justice League is probably the one that kind of brought them all together first. There might be other teams before that, but they were probably characters that started out as teams, whereas the Justice League was taking individual characters and putting them together for the first time, similar to the Avengers in Marvel, except with Justice League, it was their biggest characters altogether. So, it's something that slowly happened over time, and it's why it took decades for them to go, oh shit, this is too much now.
Yeah.
So they went, there's too many multiple realities, there's different Earths, there's too many characters with different origins that have been revised over and over time. Yeah. And they did something which I think they should do nowadays, and they definitely won't, is they went, right, hard reset, everything's starting from 1 again, let's just do that. And even though that was the good choice to do at the time, you still had people who were quite fond of these iterations of these characters, of Superman being one of them, the driving force for all those time. So, yeah, it made sense to be like, yeah, this guy's going away, but let's give him a nice ending, you know?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think Alan Moore is the guy for a nice ending.
No, you really wouldn't, would you? I can think of, well, I mean, again, I'm not as familiar with comic book writers of the 80s as maybe you are. Like, I'm more familiar with current writers, thanks to this podcast, mostly. But yeah, Moore wouldn't be the top of my head choice for somebody to do a nice kind of wistful, emotive send-off for a character.
It's probably why the guy he was having breakfast with was openly discussing it in front of Moore.
Yeah, because he wasn't expecting Moore to want to do that, right?
Maybe. I mean, again, he had done For the Man Who Has Everything, I believe, before this. So
yeah, that was 85, wasn't it?
Again, you ask me questions that I need to Google to just get an exact answer.
I need to get one of them right this week. I've gotten 2 in a row wrong, Ryan.
1985.
Yeah, baby, I got one right.
Yeah.
So he'd just written Superman the year before, but that was for like a Christmas annual, wasn't it?
An annual. I don't think it was necessary. It might have been. I think it was his Clark. It was Superman's birthday, and that's why they're giving presents. So I don't think it was Christmas. It was an annual where they just do like here's a short contained story in the middle of the normal series.
Yeah, makes sense.
So maybe he'd done that, and they went, actually, you know what? He's pretty good at Superman. He did that story that was pretty good.
It's weird because to my mind, he was breaking more boundaries with the man who has everything than he was with this.
I think there's a bit of boundary breaking in this, to be fair. I mean, we'll get into it properly.
He didn't make anyone a Nazi.
No. And maybe, yeah. But, I mean, the two I think my biggest takeaway from this overall is he humanized Superman a lot more than he probably has been previously. There's two main examples of this. The one is that one point. So, similarity to All-Star Superman, it's implied in this story, and spoilers for a comic that's 40 years old, there's the driving force behind the story is it opens with a world 10 years removed from not having Superman anymore.
Yeah.
So we know there's an end. We know that he's going away in some fashion.
Yeah.
And one of the bits that I enjoyed is him being visited by people from the future. And then they don't even explicitly tell him. They're just like, we just thought we'd come back to give you this present because we were thinking of you and, we thought you'd enjoy this. And he went, is it because you normally don't do things like that? Am I going to die soon? And they were like, no,
maybe not.
So I do enjoy that Superman works that out, mainly because these future people are dumb as fuck. But after that, as soon as he gets that news, we see a splash panel of him in the Fortress of Solitude crying. Yeah. And I thought, how rare is it to see that?
We don't even see that in The Man Who Has Everything.
Exactly, which was a criticism of yours, wasn't it?
Yeah, that he hadn't pushed. Yeah. No, you are right, actually. I think that's a really valid point here, is that he gave Superman an emotional range here that we hadn't seen before. So even though he didn't necessarily... I mean, he did some wacky shit in this as well. But even though he didn't necessarily do anything as wacky, increasing Superman's emotional range right at the end before they kind of rebooted the universe is pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah. And then the other part, and this is even like a less... Actually, no, there's a third part as well. Another part I was going to say is the beginning of the front cover of issue 2 of this is a 2-part issue story, is him flying away and his hands in the air, kind of traditional Superman pose, and the look on his face is one of sadness.
Yeah.
And that, I thought, was normally heroes only look negative in any way when they're kind of like mid-fight or they've lost someone or something like that. He's just sad and also kind of trying to hide it because he's flying away from everyone. Yeah. So again, just a thing I think was rare at the time. And the third was, again, these people from the future, 30th century heroes or whatever, they come back with a Supergirl character, and she's like, hey, I know I'm not supposed to be here because my past self is still here or whatever, and and Superman, oh no, my future self is here in the present, and she from the past went to the future. Super shenanigans, classic. But then Superman's like, it's all right. And then he's like, to the future people, it's like, she's dead in this timeline. Why did you bring her back? Like, she's not meant to know. But he's really pissed off in the moment, like when he's talking to this person. And this person's like, oh, geez, sorry, Soups, I didn't know kind of thing. And immediately Superman's like, all right, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't mean to overreact. I'm sorry. I just, But again, just a little bit of very humanizing frustration in the moment was, I thought, very, very interesting to do with the character as well.
No, I agree. I think that's a really valid point that I'd kind of overlooked a bit.
And those are just little points that I liked. They're not the most prevalent parts of this story. But I think the fact that generally, even throughout most of the story, he's not as like, well, shucks, I just got to get on with it and put a smile on my face and lead the way kind of thing. He's kind of a bit more like, oh, geez, all right, fine, come on, right, let's go. All right, I'm picking up the slack, let's go.
Yeah, totally. So, and there's a lot of zooming around in this story. It does zoom around quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening. There is an interesting kind of undercurrent of like all the villains seem to be just kicking off all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is I know it is kind of answered at the end, which we'll get to, but it's never quite as focused a mystery as it would be in like maybe modern comics. I think in this was just more. I think more was just being like, let's just get all the classic villains. Like, let's bring that. If there's last run, let's get the big ones back.
And it really does scream of that, doesn't it? Where you're absolutely right. It all feels quite busy, and the reason for it is external to the story. The reason for it is real world. It's more going, fuck it. We'll just throw everyone at it.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, because I was enjoying it, I was like, okay, fine. Like, if I was enjoying it any less, I would be more critical of that. But if what's happening in the story is interesting and enjoyable, I'll forgive like very obvious, like, you're only doing it for these external reasons, but it's fine. I'm enjoying it. It's fine.
He made it. He tied it together enough that it sort of worked.
Yeah, it was always like A leads to B leads to C. Like, it was all kind of connected. Enough to, at least make it enjoyable to read.
I know that sounds like damning with faint praise to say, oh, well, there was a vague logical thread running through it, so that's okay. But in terms of comic books, that isn't faint praise. Like, we don't always have that to say about big two comic books, do we? That there is actually a logical thread running through the story.
Yeah, and most of the time, not most, but a lot of the time, they're doing too much. So for this to just be like, he deals with this villain, and then this villain, and then this villain, and it's just fun Supermaning about each time, then I just take that's good. It was enjoyable, good to read. So with this as well, and it's a very interesting one in perspective of Alan Moore as the writer, the narration, I think, was a very interesting level here, because it's not none, but it's definitely less than I think other Moore titles.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? And it was tolerable. And again, we had this with something that we were reading recently, where I didn't hate the narration because whoever was writing it. Oh no, it was that guy. It was. I'm thinking of Stan Lee from Fantastic Four.
Ah, that's it.
But it's that same thing where Alan Moore writes well. He does write well. And so his narration, even there, and again, it wasn't as egregious as it could be, was it? Let's be frank.
Yeah.
But and you'll probably have some examples because you're better at writing examples down than I am. But the narration itself was, for the most part, well written. And so I don't mind it if it's enjoyable in and of itself, which it was.
Yeah, I didn't take specific examples, but generally what I remember from it was contextually made sense because the whole thing is framed as Lois Lane giving an interview to someone at the Daily Bugle about the last years of, the last moments of Superman before he disappeared, essentially. And it's just enough to remind you the Lois Lane is telling the story, and it's also just enough for her to give insight as someone who was there for most of the events.
Yeah,
so it's
totally.
It's not her telling the entire story to us, the reader of the comic. It's just to remind you who is telling the story within the world.
Yeah, and it also has an effect of like grounding the story and pulling it along, doesn't it? Which again, sometimes narration in comic books doesn't do that. Sometimes it is just an incessant interior monologue, which of course Alan Moore doesn't give us here. It is more sort of diegetic, and it really is pulling the story along, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, I was pleased with the level of narration it was, and it made sense. It wasn't just the character narrating to themselves in their own head, which I think is the most egregious version of it. This was there's narration for a reason. We've shown you right at the start why that is. So I thought it was absolutely fine. What do you think of the first villain that we interact here? One of your favorites, old Bizarro.
Fuck off, right? Just, what is the point? What is the point?
I think after this, I'm more on your side now. I find Bizarro very annoying now.
Was this the tipping point? Because we know why I didn't like it, right? What was the tipping point for you?
I think just as a concept, because he's like, and I'm not doing the Bizarro voice because that's annoying. He's all, for anyone who doesn't know, Bizarro is the Bizarro version of Superman. He's all like, me, I'm Bizarro. Like, that's his whole thing, right? And he's just so annoying whenever he's around for that. Like, he was a little annoying already to me, but now he's like, Bizarro thought that he should actually become the alternate version of Superman and be the opposite of everything that he is. So that led him through the line of, I blew up my own world and came here as a man, whereas you didn't blow up your world and came here as a baby, and then you came to this world to start saving people, so I just started killing people, and now, because you're alive, I'm gonna die. Like, that's his kind of train of thought here.
And isn't that just... I've got a cat attacking me. Isn't that just biblically fucking dumb?
Yeah, and it's what's especially dumb about it is he could have just gone straight to, well, if I want to be the ultimate opposite of Superman, he's alive, I should be dead. Like, he could have got to that immediately, but for the sake of the story, he had to be like, I'm going to cause a bit of a ruckus first, and then I'm going to make Superman sad by dying.
And it's not like Moore had a paucity of villains to draw from here. He had every villain that had built up over 50 years of Superman that he could have picked from. And he comes straight in with the shittest Superman villain that exists.
Yeah, well, to be fair, there's a lot that we don't know about which could be a lot shitter. Like, there's a lot that don't make the cut for this special at the end.
Yeah, I suppose,
but
yeah.
I think with Bizarro, he was probably a more used character because I'd imagine, this is pure speculation on my part, I imagine if you put a back in the day comic books on newspaper stands kind of thing, if you saw a front cover with Superman fighting an evil version of Superman, that's immediately an eye-grabbing thing to a kid who's just looking at what comic to buy, rather than if they're just fighting some random villain. So I think Bizarro got a lot of mileage out of just who he looked like.
Yeah, because it almost gives me the same feel as, like, you know, when you play Street Fighter or something and you both want to be Ryu, and so you end up being like your buddy, because it's his controller and it's his Sega, is Ryu in the white gi, and then you're like green gi Ryu, and you're just standing there before the fight looking silly as alternate universe Ryu. It gives me that exact same feeling. No, I think you're right. The idea of Superman having a villain that is just a wacky looking Superman will have sold a lot of comics. Don't necessarily think, and I'm really glad you're coming around to my way of thinking. I never thought this would happen. I don't necessarily think it's good.
No, and that's and there are things to criticize in this bit of Moore's work, which maybe it's because he was writing this for a different purpose than his other work. Most of his work is very much satisfying himself as the writer, whereas this, I think maybe there was like a bit more thinking of what do the fans want for this kind of thing. Like, and I don't think Moore's above that thinking as a writer.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think is the hallmark of a great writer is that they can write to a brief, and there is some of Moore's work that is a bit masturbatory. I would argue that Watchmen...
I mean, his script, the screenplay or the scripts for the comics alone...
His treatments are very masturbatory, aren't they? The way that he writes these things, and that's kind of... Yeah, that's so interesting. I would love to see what he sent to the artist for this. You know, was it more or less
like a staff DC writer rather than someone who like knows what they're getting into by doing like a dedicated project with them?
Yeah, exactly that. Because again, you're absolutely right, aren't you? This doesn't feel like Watchmen. This doesn't feel like a Killing Joke. It does feel more contained, I suppose.
Contained and more writing within the lines and the conventions of the character, which I think is fair enough.
But it would have been shoddy workmanship of him had he just gone all out with it and done whatever he wanted, because this was supposed to be a love letter to that kind of era of Superman.
Yeah.
Which, that era of Superman, like, its conception until the 1980s, that is Golden Age, that is Silver Age. That is essentially everything that everyone loves about this character, who is so iconic, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't hold against him. But the only reason I mention it all is I feel like there's more to criticize here. I found a few more things to criticize here than other bits of Moore's work. The one that comes up after this is the way that everyone finds out that Clark Kent is Superman, which happens soon after the Bizarro thing. Do you want to tell everyone how that happens?
No, I'm chuckling. No, I would like you to tell everyone how that happens.
All right. So a box shows up.
You've clearly thought about this a bit more than I have, and it wouldn't do it justice. So part of my charm when I do the sort of, the synopses is that I half-arse it. I think to half-arse this wouldn't be to do it justice because it's comically bad, isn't it?
Well, it's hard to half-arse something that is quite bare bones in itself. Like that's the criticism. So for anyone who hasn't read it, what happens is Clark Kent is just at work at the Daily Planet and they're in like a TV studio or something, and a big box turns up. Oh no, a little box and a big box. I can't remember. Some boxes turn up, right?
Yeah.
And they open them and there's a bunch of little Superman toys in there. And like action figures, and people are like, oh wow, this is crazy. And someone's like, yeah, obviously, like you squeeze the legs and they talk, or whatever. And they squeeze the leg, and a bloody laser beam comes out of the eyes, and they're like, oh bloody hell, what's going on here? And then the little Superman start flying around, so it's a little bit chaotic.
Yeah.
And Clark Kent's like, oh, I can't really, even though I've got super speed, maybe at this point or something, I can't just dip out. Like, oh no, this is inconvenient. And then the Superman dolls fire at Clark Kent. And everyone's like, oh no, Clark Kent's dying. And his all that's happened is his clothes have been like disintegrated and he's wearing the Superman costume under it. And then everyone's like, oh, you're Superman.
Because it is sort of canon that Clark Kent cuts around with the Superman kit underneath his normal clothes, right? Because we see him get changed a lot.
Yeah.
But it just makes me wonder, and I'd never really thought about it before, but like, what if Clark Kent like had a day where he played racquetball with some buds from the office or something? Do you think he had to sit at home and be like, right, I'm playing racquetball today, so I can't wear the Superman kit under the normal kit because I'm going to have to put me like tennis gear on?
To take your proposition seriously, I don't think he'd be even playing any kind of sports at all in the first place, because I think he'd be like...
Well, do you not think Clark Kent would be invited?
That potentially as well, but I think that's also contributes to this. I think he portrays himself as a guy, he's like, yeah, he's big and he looks big and he's muscular, but I think he's portrayed himself, or Clark Kent, as, like gangly and uncoordinated, like, oh, shucks, I've fallen over again kind of thing. So I think that's why no one asked him. We see less
and less of that in late Superman, though, don't we?
Yeah.
By this point, because in the earlier iterations that we've read, that is like 100% the thing. Like, Clark Kent's like, oh, I'm so weak and stupid and uncoordinated, I couldn't possibly help Lois Lane when she's being mugged at a ball. Whereas by the 80s, Clark Kent is a bit more, not Supermanized, because he's still not like Superman in his day-to-day life. It's not like Bruce Wayne, where he's like, I'm a badass all the time. Or Tony Stark, who is a badass all the time. But like 80s Clark Kent isn't quite as gangly and awkward as like 1930s Clark Kent was, is he? No,
but I think it's still a part of that core concept of people just not even thinking of him as taking part in that kind of stuff. Even if he's not as explicitly slapstick and Three Stooges about it as he might have been before. I think the 80s version, he's just kind of like, I'm not really good at sports. I can't really like, and I think as well, he would just find a way out of being in that position. Because what if he hits the ball a little too hard and then someone's like, you remind me of when you did that. Like, he's trying to avoid all those scenarios. That's my headcanon. He
absolutely sends it through the wall because he's Superman.
Exactly.
Just out of interest, because we are this is as close to a start and beginning as we'll ever get. Because we have read Superman 1, and then this is like the last Superman before Crisis on Infinite Earth, right?
I mean, so running alongside Crisis is the best way to kind of put it.
Yeah. So how do you feel Superman had grown as a character between then and there? So between Action Comics, was it Action Comics 1 that he was in?
Yeah, Action Comics 1, yeah.
So Action Comics 1, and then this kind of Crisis on Infinite Earth, we're into the late 80s. DC is kind of entering its big second era now. It's rebooting its whole universe. Because, like, I definitely feel that this represents a massive upping of the stakes. Like, the stakes are a lot higher now. Clark Kent, for me, is a bit more sort of a presence. He's not a presence, but he's more together. Like, this iteration of Superman seems a bit smarter at hiding who he is and stuff. I'm just interested as to how you feel about it.
I think he's a product of each individual decade. So I think to look at it as a kind of linear line would be just kind of looking at it chronologically. It's like, well, he was like this in the 40s, and he was like this in the 50s, and he's like this in the 60s. I don't think it tracks in any, like, the only way And even the thing I was going to say, the only thing that did increase like that was his powers, his powers. Because
the power creep.
The beginning, he could leap over a tall building. Now he's flying, across the world in like minutes.
Yeah.
And I know in Crisis of Infinite Earths, there's a part where he's like pulling planets into line, or if it's not Crisis, it's like a similar title. But even with that, he had a power creep in like the 50s, 60s, where they just gave him all the powers.
Yeah.
Like, so his individual powers, his strength and his speed and his fly, those have increased undoubtedly. But also at one point, he had the power to create a small Superman from his hand, which had all of his powers. Or at one point, he had the power to eat really quickly. Or at one point, he had the power to, like in the Superman film, which inspired like a reason why they had all these powers. At one point, he rebuilds the Great Wall of China with his eye beams. Like he literally shoots eye beams, and the bricks put themselves back together. So
so you think it's sort of almost a bit reductive because actually there wasn't a linear power creep. There were points where there'd been points before this where it'd gotten a bit out of hand and they'd already scaled it back some anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's valid.
So that's why it's hard to say like how did he grow over this time? It's like, well, he was here and then he was up and then he was down, then he was up and then he was down. Like that's the best way. This is more a celebration of the style and the kind of vibe of the decades rather than looking at this one character's growth from point A to point B,
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I see how that was kind of a reductive question. I think it's interesting though.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So with this, there's a little bit of more esqueness, like adding a little bit of seriousness to it, which I just thought was a nice little detail because it wasn't overshown. There's a character, Perry White, I think his name is. He's the editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet, and Superman's trying to get all his loved ones to the what's it called? Fortress of Solitude. And there's one bit was like, oh, he's trying to get Mrs. White out there, and remembering that at the time Perry and his wife were separating, and just this added little tension of like they then are both at the Fortress of Solitude and they're kind of reconnecting a little bit because of this life or death situation and stuff, and it wasn't overly played at all. I just thought it was so interesting, this just little almost background detail that was like just added a splash of realism in this very camp over the top superhero world.
In a much smaller way, it put me in mind of what he was doing with the comedian and the two female characters, where there's that kind of undercurrent story that maybe the comedian is one of the superheroes' dads because of a very coerced sexual interaction he had with her mum back in the day. And it's sort of never really explicitly stated, but kind of this understated human thing that's woven into the underneath of the story. And he's very good at that, isn't he?
Yeah, I would say with that does kind of culminate in a big reveal, because there's that issue of Manhattan and Silk Spectre on Mars where she kind of breaks down at the realization. But I know what you mean, whereas that they're kind of still in the background of the main stuff. It's just that this just doesn't culminate in anything big at the end.
Yeah.
But it's that same kind of style of writing that more, is like putting those little details in, subtly in the background.
Yes.
It's funny you mentioned the comedian, because there's a mysterious new character that's introduced in the present day of the story. Bloody Lois Lane's got a new husband, and his name is Jordan Elliott, and she's now Mrs. Elliott. And he comes in about halfway through, and I was a bit surprised that he resembled the comedian a bit.
Yeah, just a bit, right?
He had the mustache and the white, like, sideburns, this kind of thing. And as soon as I saw him, I was like, did they just use a comedian's character model for that? Like, that was funny.
Is that copy pasta?
I don't know. But, I mean, as I said, we'll get to this Jordan character at the end, because there's an interesting reveal about him that we'll get to that you couldn't possibly work out beforehand. So
spoilers for a 39-year-old comic.
Yes, yeah. So beyond that, I think it does turn into a lot of superhero shenanigans at this point, which I think, again, is essential for celebrating this character. We have the whole thing with Lex Luthor and Brainiac, which I thought did do Lex Luthor dirty a bit. I thought, because Lex Luthor is his main villain. And in this, he is kind of resigned to a meat puppet by Brainiac, right? And I thought, that's doing, like, I one of the things I like about All-Star Superman from Grant Morrison is I do like that Lex is the kind of be-all, end-all of he's the beginning and the end of the story for Superman.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it should be. So I find it interesting that Lex is just like, I found the Brainiac head. I'm going to crack it open and get all the secrets. Oh no, it's taking me over and now it's using my body. But that being said, the whole him being controlled by Brainiac while conscious, I thought was a really kind of not scary or creepy as such, but just like, like a bit like, oh, that's an interesting like feature of this story, him being used as a human meat puppet.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree.
And then as from getting to there, we then get this big showdown at the Fortress of Solitude. And again, what I thought was interesting is it's all Brainiac stuff.
Yes.
He's kind of engineering all this. And then,
so I don't know Brainiac. Should I know Brainiac?
We haven't read anything for him, so I don't think he was even in All-Star Superman at all. Yeah. Basically, Brainiac is an alien computer that's dead set on kind of collecting all the information in the universe.
Yeah.
And as part of collecting the information, and I don't know if this is the more maybe he was different at this time. Maybe I'm thinking of the more modern iteration. But generally, he's like, I'll collect all the information, and then once I've collected all the information from a planet, then I destroy it, because I don't want any new information being made that I can that I'm not here to collect. He knows that
isn't it?
He knows that if he doesn't destroy the planets, he'll just be running around constantly collecting new information. He's like, I want a finite amount. Like, I want to limit this from, and he wants to be the most
collect
powerful
all
creature.
of it, but I need there to be a finite amount. It's such a strange idea, isn't it?
Yeah. The most famous thing in the comics that I think Brainiac is known for is he stole a city from Krypton before it blew up, the city of Kandor. So there's a whole storyline where when Superman meets Brainiac, he realizes he's got this shrunken city of Kandor with living Kryptonians in it. So Superman has a bit of like, oh, I'm not alone. Like, there are others like me. Oh no, they're miniature. I'm going to have to work out a way to cure them of this. So that's always like a background thing.
Them.
Yeah. So that's always a background thing with Superman from that point onwards, where he's like, I've got others like me. They're just kind of indisposed at this moment right now, but I'm working on it. But yeah, so that's
working on making them not tiny.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's Brainiac's whole deal. Then we get one villain that I didn't know about, a bloody Kryptonite Man, who I've never seen before.
Right. Yeah, totally. So I'm not the only one who was fucking lost with that.
No. I mean, it makes sense. Like, who's going to be a big deal for Superman to deal with? A guy made out of the thing that gives him the only weakness.
But, like, that means he's only a problem for Superman. And that's what I couldn't work out about it, is, like, where this guy fits into everything. Because surely Superman would just call Wonder Woman or Batman and be like, the fucking Krypton guy's back. Can you just, go deal with the Kryptonite dude?
For every other series, or like every other issue of comic, I think you're very correct. In this, they do solve a bit, and I'm going somewhere with this because there's a really funny part.
Go for it.
The Brainiac takes Kryptonite Man, and I think there's 30th century villains, whatever, but they go to the Fortress of Solitude, and then they encase it in a bubble. So no one else can, because he literally says, Superman's got bloody mates, they'll be here any minute, I'm going to secure us all in so we can, do this privately. And then it cuts to some of the superheroes at this, outside of this dome, this force field, showing that they can't get in, because you've got Shazam, at the time known as Captain Marvel, and Wonder Woman, and a couple of others I didn't recognize, kind of hitting against the force field. Like, they're pretty strong characters. If they can't get through, then, that's we've established what's happening.
Shazam is like weirdly hardcore, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got like the strength of Hercules or something. But the reason I mention this specifically is in that panel, you've also got bloody Batman and Boy Wonder hitting the force field with sticks. It's like, my brother in Christ, you are not stronger than Wonder Woman. Like, not even close.
I don't remember it being specified which Boy Wonder it is.
And at this point, it could have been it could have been either Dick Grayson or Jason Todd. It depends when Death in the Family happened, which I know was in the 80s.
If it's Dick Grayson, I defend it. If it's Jason Todd, it's bollocks. That's just how this works, unfortunately.
You think Dick Grayson had a chance to get through this force field that not even Shazam or Wonder Woman could get through with a bloody baton?
Dick Grayson would have charmed it. Dick Grayson would have, like, talked the force field round.
Yeah, but he definitely wasn't charming it. And I'll tell you what as well. The comic storyline happened in 1988 but Jason Todd still might have been the Robin at this point. Yeah, so it probably was Jason Todd Robin, is what I'm saying.
Well, then clearly he was never going to get through it, was he? Clearly
it's stupid, actually.
Yeah, clearly, if it's not Dick Grayson doing it, it's stupid. I think my hero worship of Dick Grayson has gone too far, Ryan.
Don't worry about it. Worry about it once you get the waifu and the memorabilia and the entire room dedicated to him. So
I'm so worried that at some point you're going to show up with a Dick Grayson body pillow for me.
One day. Not in this economy, but one day. So
yeah, I was going to say, not right now. Consumer goods are expensive.
So at this point in the story, we get a kind of fun revolution of the characters who Superman had saved, kind of finding things within the fortress to actually have a chance to help Superman with all this. Old love interest of Superman, Lana Lang, I think her name is. But she gets in this pool of water. And she's like, I remember this from a previous story, and it gave people superpowers. And it literally has a sign next to it. And this is classic Moore, because 100% he wrote this in the bloody script. The sign says, magic, in quotes, lake water, and then in brackets, probably unidentified radiation source. And that's funny in itself. But the war is literally just in a hole in the ground. There's no fence. Yeah. There's not even a barrier. There's a sign facing the opposite way from the doorway. And it's like, and the fact that she knew what it was and got into it, it's like, anyone could have just walked into that and got superpowers now.
I imagine people did.
And I get, Superman, you didn't intend on having guests, but you should have also foreseen this general scenario as a possibility, right? So,
well, you'd just think you'd keep the Fortress of Solitude a bit neater than that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you close the door, like put a lock on that room at the very least.
The room with the radioactive puddle in it, yes.
Potentially. He did stress potentially. Which is still bad enough.
Yeah.
But,
it's potentially terrible.
The reason I mention all that is we get some very interesting and towards the end of this, appropriate part, get some interesting deaths where we get this Lana Lang character who Clark or Superman was having a kind of love triangle choosing between her and Lois Lane. There's a really interesting part, I thought, where he's taught as this Lana character comes out of the pool and has all these superpowers, including super hearing. She hears Superman in another room telling someone, I just feel so bad because I love Lois and I don't know how to tell Lana. And I thought that was a fun bit of like, oh, what are the odds that that happened at the same time? But then Lana's just like, right, let's go out, save the day. Like, I'm not standing around to be sad about this. And then she gets bloody killed by Brainiac. And I thought that was an interesting, like, turn of events.
Well, have we seen her since? Like, is this permadeath for her?
I reckon she's come back.
Right, okay. But this would have been, because this is kind of the end of this iteration of the character, the end of this run.
Yeah, it probably
would have been permadeath for her, wouldn't it? For this version of that character, like, Moore killed somebody off. That doesn't happen that often in these kind of books, does it?
No. But of course, that is not the saddest death in this comic.
Oh, no.
Because we do get, and I've given away before I've even mentioned the appearance of the character, we do get reintroduced to Crypto the Superdog, who bravely and valiantly gives his life taking down Kryptonite Man. Crypto
can't kill the dog.
It's bloody Moore, he can, and he will, and he did.
And he did, yeah. It was quite a potent death as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they do an interesting part there where Superman isn't there when it happens, but he hears it happening. But he still has to get on with, he's trying to get Lois out to safety and stuff, so he doesn't even have time to mourn the loss of his best friend, I'm not talking about bloody Jimmy Olsen, who I think maybe also dies. I can't remember. I'm not really that big a fan of Jimmy Olsen, but so we have some deaths. The everything gets escalated, builds up to this showdown. Brainiac knows from these future people that Superman's going to be gone after this. Through a fight with his biggest nemesis. So he's like, well, that's bloody me. I'm bloody winning then. Oh, and Lana, while she's superpowered, kills Lex Luthor, and Brainiac's like, well, that makes controlling this body a little more difficult, but I can still do it. And so Luthor is a dead corpse being piloted by an alien technology.
Fucking weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is very Alan Moore. That is very much Moore's influence here, isn't it? Because, like, I don't feel like other comic book writers from the 1980s would have gone there. But, like, only Alan Moore would have been like, yeah, I'm going to kill Lex Luthor and then Brainiac is going to pilot him as a meat puppet.
Do you think he wrote most of the story and got, like, it approved? And then once it got to the end, he was like, just added these little bits. And they were like, well, he's written most of the story. We've already, like, you know, the art's done and stuff. Like, just let him do his thing now. We're rebooting the universe. It doesn't matter.
Give him the weird Lex Luthor meat puppet. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. No, I definitely can see that happening, yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, Brainiac does get handily defeated by Superman, which I thought was a fun kind of misdirect because it was building up to Brainiac. And then Superman kind of reminds everyone, the reader included, it's like, oh yeah, hang on, all my villains were being like kind of pushed and coerced into all this attacking, and I still don't know who did it. And he's like, actually, there's only one person who could have done it. And apparently Superman's biggest nemesis, according to Moore, is one Mr. Mxyzptlk. And I've probably mispronounced that name. But this is the fifth dimensional being who we did see a bit of a version of an All-Star Superman.
He's the tiny Superman, isn't he? The weird one.
The other version was that we saw. This version, he's just a guy. He's just a funny-looking guy in a hat, which he does address as being like, actually, I do every 2,000 years, I change it up, and I've been mischievous for 2,000 years. Now it's my turn to be evil.
Yeah,
and I thought, that's very oversimplified for Moore. I think he phoned that in.
Yeah, I didn't love the ending, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, it just there's an aspect of it that I did like. The whole Mr. Mxyzptlk thing, be like, well, now I'm actually evil now, and I'm a fifth dimensional being, so I'm all powerful and blah blah.
Yeah,
I did like that. There was a classic Alan Moore kind of callback, you know, sowing seeds early in the story. The thing he got as a gift from the future Justice League or whoever was a statue of himself, and he's still holding the statue. He's like, this bloody thing. And then Lois is the one who's like, you're actually holding something in the statue. And he looks and he's like, oh, I know what that is. And it is an existing thing. It's a phantom portal generator or something. There's the Phantom Zone is a big Superman thing. And so he's like, I'll bloody use this on him because nothing else is going to work. And he does it. And then Mr. Mxyzptlk, in his evil form, is like, I'm going to teleport away, actually. Oh, no, that killed me. That's basically how it happens. And then Superman's like, yeah, he tried to teleport away when I used the weapon, and that killed him. Just like I knew it would. And I'm like, I don't think you did
It's all
that.
dispatched with a bit handily, isn't it?
Yes, but the aspect, and that's all super shenanigans, a bit too contrived. Again, I like the clue set, like the sowing seeds earlier on and what have you.
Yeah.
What I like about it is Superman doesn't like the fact that he just killed someone, even though they're a fifth dimensional higher being, kind of, you know, like far away from human as you could get in, even in this world. And he's still like, he has that kind of grounding moment of, I shouldn't choose who lives or dies, even in this situation.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that being his reason for stopping being Superman, he kind of does like I'm going to walk into this room with gold kryptonite, which takes away my powers, and then I'm going to walk out into the snow and die, is a bit, you know, there's a bit of like, oh, there was a hatch in the thing and he escaped out there, but he probably died because it's in the middle of the bloody Arctic and no one can survive in those temperatures. And I like his reason for kind of hanging it up, the kind of life or death stuff. And then
I
for
think
him,
his actual death, though, the actual, like, the way he goes about it is probably the most impactful part of that ending.
Yeah, exactly. And I think...
And it makes for cool imagery, doesn't it?
Yes. And I think Moore was building up to that. And I think that resonates, you know, emotionally enough. And then we get back to the present, and Lois is giving the interview, and she's like, "Well, that's all there is." And the interviewer's guy's like, "Yeah, that's great. We'll run this. You'll see in the newspaper, whatever." Anyway, nice to meet you, Mr. Jordan Elliott, and hope you two are good. And I'm gonna go now. And earlier at one point, this guy Jordan Elliott's like, "Oh, bloody Superman! He's full of himself, and you know he's no working schlub like you and me," kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then after the report's gone, and it's just him and Lois, and they've got a baby whose name's Jonathan, that happens to also be Clark Kent's dad's name, Jonathan Kent.
Yeah.
And the baby's he's at the fireplace, which is not on or anything. It's just there's coal in the fireplace, and he picks up a bit of coal and he crushes it into a diamond. And it's like, oh no, who could have guessed this crazy reveal that this mysterious new partner of Lois Lane is actually Superman?
Yeah.
I was absolutely blown away by that.
I was so totally surprised that this guy who kind of looks like a slightly older Superman is actually Superman.
I could not believe it. I think, in all seriousness, the note I made about that was it's very predictable, but it's still nice to see that this character got a happy ending, got to retire and just live a normal life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
and I feel like that was appropriate at the very, especially for, I think, as contrived as the whole big final battle was, I think more did nail the ending in terms of, it may not be like my favorite kind of superhero writing and stuff, but I think it was exactly correct for ending this era, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Well, and this is the thing, isn't it? Within the context of it ending an era, it's nice that it all wrapped up quite conveniently. It's nice that he put a bow on it. And again, you know, when Moore has been given big characters in the past, he's not necessarily treated them with that kind of treatment. So it's kind of cool that he just did that here.
Yeah, and like we said, he is a Superman fan. Like, he likes the character, and he wanted to do something good for him, I think, for this fictional character. Yeah. So, yeah, and I think that's, unless you've got anything more to say about this story or anything.
No, just that I liked it, and that, I mean, notwithstanding all of the things were criticised, like, I didn't love Bizarro, I didn't particularly love the ending, but I liked the way he got there, and I liked the kind of general beats of the story. It's definitely worth a read. Yeah,
absolutely. I in terms of ranking Superman stories that I've read, I think for me, All-Star is still top. I do think this one does some aspects better than All-Star.
Yeah.
But I think All-Star was a better overall collection, you know, of issues for all its problems and criticisms as well. I think, and maybe it's just because it's a more modern version.
As far as I'm concerned, the less said about All-Star, the better. Because I really didn't like it, did I?
You've registered your hate for the comic, so it's more than on record.
Yeah, I didn't like it. But yeah, no, I thought this was fun. I mean, it's still not my favorite Superman story. That still goes to the man who has everything.
Yeah, and that's still a really good one. Like, I would highly recommend that for anyone. But again, that's so far away from the main stuff of Superman. That's, like you said right at the beginning, that's more breaking conventions than anything in this or All-Star.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we did have another comic that we were going to talk about. The Whatever Happened to...
I mean, we've gone an hour 10 and we've not started yet.
Yeah, this is what I was kind of looking at. So we read, and we were going to talk about Whatever Happened to Truth, Justice, and the American Way, which is a one-issue story, but it's a long one issue of a story.
Like maybe 49 pages or something.
Yeah, something like that. So maybe we save that for a later date, and we can...
Because it's so fucking good, Ryan.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, so preview.
I enjoyed it more than this one.
Yeah, we could talk about it next week. We could. There's a 2-part Superman special.
This is a 2-part Superman special. We are going to talk about this one next week because it was really good and justified its own episode. I'm really excited about that idea.
All right. Well,
because we would have like 15 minutes to talk about it, and I don't think we'd do it justice.
No, exactly. So yeah. So little preview for next week. We are covering another Superman story, and it's very different to this one. So I think very interesting to do these two kind of back to back, week to week.
I do have some follow-up from the last episode.
Oh, yeah. I have a comment to read as well. So we're in comment corner for everything. So do you want to do yours first?
Yeah, let's do that. So I'm just going to quickly get it open. This is a comment that we received from our historical correspondent.
Ah, yes.
He said, Ryan giving me a B- for my historical consultancy. The audacity. Don't see him doing any research to get the history right. Now, I think he may have very slightly misunderstood what was happening there, because I don't think you were giving him a B-. I would think you were giving me a B- because I hadn't charged my phone and I was trying to say what he said from memory, And so I did. It's very rare, Ryan, that I stuck up for you, because the humble listener, you know that 90% of the reason I do this podcast is to talk about Dick Grayson and argue with Ryan. But I did sort of say, I think he gave me a B- for the way I presented it. And he said, yeah, I thought that might have been meant for you, but I'll be damned if I don't provide you with more tangent material if I have a chance to. So there you go. You historical correspondent, you got a tangent, and you got to log your dissatisfaction.
Well, it's an odd feeling being stood up for. I'm not sure I'm used to it. It feels quite odd, but I acknowledge it nonetheless. I will say, anyone who's willing to write in and say anything to us, I'll always give an A++, whether positive or negative. And that goes double. That goes double for the historical correspondent. So I guess they're on like A++ squared or whatever that is.
A++ squared for the historical correspondent. But you have a comment. Who commented?
Yeah. I was just saying I wasn't very good at algebra, so whatever that equals. But we got a comment from the superfan of the podcast, one Leon Goopy.
Leon.
And it was on the Wonder Woman episode that they described as another fire episode. They said they've been slacking as number one fan because they hadn't commented on some of the previous ones. But to be fair, they had got apparently bit by a dog at work and quit their job. So I think that's more than reasonable enough a reason to not comment on our, don't feel like you have to go out of your way just to provide us with reassurance of people engaging in the podcast. Focus on your life first.
Big stuff happening for Leon Goopy there.
Exactly. But as I said, focus on your life first. Hope it works out, gets better, and you get back on your feet. And then feel free to comment, like, subscribe, rate us 5-star on podcast app of choice. And that doesn't just go for the superfan. That goes for everyone listening, But they did say they're going to try and basically get up to date. And they also said you guys are the goats. So
the goats, goated. You heard it here first.
Exactly. So yeah, that's I think all we can do on this episode so far. And we've done a very naturalistic. Well, I've done a very naturalistic call to action, and we've set up preview for the next week's episode. I think we're doing better now than most weeks.
That's good podcast admin. That's really good administration work from us as podcasters.
Yeah, great synergy, which we both love and big fans of.
Corporate synergy, I live for it.
Exactly. Well, on that note, do you want to tell the listeners goodbye and I'll play the recorded exit bit?
Thank you so much for listening. I'm so excited to talk to you again next week about even more Superman. Have a wonderful time. Bye.
And thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe to get notified of our future episodes as well. And if you're feeling particularly generous, then please leave a 5-star review on whatever podcast app you're using. If you'd like to get in contact with us, then send an email to comiclit@gmail.com. You can also watch videos by me on the Comic Stand YouTube page, which is linked in the description. Thank you, goodbye.